Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to our channel and thanks for logging on. Today, I join you with the latest of our Versus series of watch comparisons, and we have two heavy hitters from a heavy-hitting name. Jaeger-LeCoultre twin minute repeaters, each one with gongs welded to the sapphire, each one from the Master Grande Tradition Ultra Haute de Gamme series. Let's start with the 2009 yellow gold 100-piece limited edition, the Master Grande Tradition minute repeater regulator, entirely in yellow gold with a rose lathe cut guilloche dial covering the front side of the repeater movement. You might suspect this one to be a little bit damped in sound intensity and sustain compared to the titanium vanadium competitor, but let's hear it and find out. Surprisingly loud with impressive sustain and tone. One of the reasons JLC is able to accomplish that is because the plaque at the base of the dial with the musical notes represents the point at which the repeater gongs themselves are physically welded to the sapphire to improve the quality, the volume, and the sustain of the repeater. But let's hear what grade 5 titanium vanadium alloy actually sounds like. Now, titanium alloy is said to be the loudest repeater material. Let's see if that holds up in practice. It's certainly brighter. I'm not sure that it's actually louder. Both of these watches are said to be able to punch above 60 decibels, which is extraordinary for a minute repeater. The titanium version, in some cases, has been registered as high as 70. Again, I'm not sure if this one is actually louder than the yellow gold model, but it certainly has a different tonal quality to it, a different sound, a brighter sound. Let's say the yellow gold is a little bit more Gibson Les Paul, the titanium is a bit more Fender Stratocaster. But let's take a look at where these two watches excel individually, because each has a separate set of strengths. Let's start with the Master Grande Tradition minute repeater regulator. Now, like its rival here, it was a limited edition of 100 pieces, but coming out 2 model years before the titanium Master Grande Tradition, this watch was the beginning of the Master Grande Tradition line. In terms of bare dimensions, it's 44 millimeters across the case. It's 15.5 millimeters thick, which means it's actually half a millimeter thinner than the titanium timepiece. From lug to lug, given the size and heft of this solid gold case, 53 millimeters from extremity to extremity is quite reasonable. Now, where the watch also has a little bit of an artisanal edge is the fact that it is beautifully finished gold, while the titanium is actually harder to finish. From an emotional and historical standpoint, for many collectors, nothing else is gold, and this watch will have the advantage on that basis alone. Now, the dial does cover up the visible repeater side of the movement, which for some will be a little bit of a deficit in merit relative to its rival, but it makes up for that with a unique regulator arrangement that's actually easier by a small margin to read than the fully open-worked dial of its rival. It also features exquisite rose lathe guilloche. This is the real thing, not stamped, but turned on a traditional 19th century rose lathe by a guillocheur. This is artwork in and of itself. Now, turn the watch over and you see where it extends its advantage. Its caliber 947R features bare micourt, or German silver. Unlike rhodium-plated brass, which is blindingly silver, think Patek Philippe, a traditional untreated micourt movement features bridges made of copper, zinc, and nickel, and the combination has a rich honey-colored hue that becomes more intense with time. Now, this particular watch is substantially more elaborate than its rival. At first glance, very similar, but you'll note here, it's made of the same micourt material, but it's been covered with rhodium, which sometimes, especially in this particular application, can blunt the appeal of the material. Why bother if you can't see it? Moreover, you'll see that this movement features a hand-engraved balance bridge. Note the engraving's Longa style on the balance bridge, as well as the black polished cap to the regulator assembly. There you can see it to good advantage. Additional labor and love was lavished on this movement to create both of those features. Moreover, if you turn it at angles to the light, you begin to see the mirrored anglage along the edges of the three-quarter style pocket watch inspired bridge. The anglage laid at the edges of this set of bridges is far superior to that on this timepiece. So while this timepiece has a different aesthetic, it is not finished to quite the same level. It has its own look, but it doesn't have a comparable level of finish. Still extraordinary. Nevertheless, this movement is on another planet. This is the highest level that Jaeger-LeCoultre ever executes. And this watch, with an original retail price of $234,000, did cost $70,000 more than its titanium counterpart here, explaining the disparity in quality. Now, there is no qualitative difference in how they run or the time they keep, with one exception. You'll note the magnifier on this case back, and that's because it's present to help to enlarge and draw attention to Jaeger-LeCoultre's first ever serially produced synthetic escape wheel and anchor rendered in silicon, coated in synthetic diamond, operating unlubricated, and incredible mechanical refinement that Jaeger-LeCoultre has not been able to serialize beyond several low production series. This, its counterpart, the Master Grande Tradition Tourbillon Perpetual Calendar, and the Extreme Lab 1, of which perhaps 24 were made. So if you see it here, chances are you'll likely never see it again. You'll also note the complexity of the Côte de Soleil across the bridges. On the yellow gold watch, you'll note the beautifully textured double ridge, whereas on the Master Grande Tradition minute repeater in titanium, you'll note single ridge. There is a difference, and again, that difference is the time it takes to execute the finishing. Now, let's take a look at the Master Grande Tradition minute repeater. For comparative purposes, note, Master Control 1000 hours. Now, take a look at the signature on the regulator. Master 1000 chrono, not Master 1000 hours control. The chrono was a special timing standard no worse than -4, or -1 I should say, +4 seconds per day. So -1 +4, whereas the standard to which the Master minute repeater was held was the standard Master control. The particular standard, and it does vary from model to model, for this watch being -1 +6. It's a small distinction, but it's there nonetheless. And again, it is reflected in the prices of these watches. All those small refinements add up. But let's talk about the one knockout blow, the incontrovertible advantage that this watch enjoys over its rival, and that is the spectacular open dial. You can see the most impressive and beautifully finished, complex and engaging portions of the caliber 947. What you're looking at right here is, in a word, the business end of the watch. Three-quarter bridges with twin mainspring barrels don't show you much. So for the regulator to have its advantage on the front side of the movement, quite simply, it fires its bolt in the wrong place. This is where the action is. You can see the screws, you can see the rack and snail, the violet of the pivot jewels, you can see the governor just underneath the power reserve. There it is right there. You can also see the separate spring for the governor to run the repeater. You can see the repeater hammers and the unique squared off gongs that Jaeger-LeCoultre uses. They don't use the rounded gongs that are common in the industry. This special gong shape helps to provide greater volume, tone, and sustain. You'll also note that this watch features a completely unique aesthetic. It's more technologically progressive. It feels almost like a concept watch pulled straight off the show stand and sold onto the street. Also to its advantage, it's much lighter on the wrist thanks to the grade 5 titanium vanadium alloy. This makes it both lighter and easier to wear on a smaller wrist, and much more resistant to scratches and scuffs than the conventional yellow gold Master minute repeater regulator. The regulator is as vulnerable as any gold watch when scratches, scuffs, and the insults and injuries of life on the wrist come into play, whereas this grade 5 titanium vanadium is actually harder than standard 316L steel. Both of these watches, it should be said, are Galacticos. Both from the Master Grande Tradition line. They both represent the best of what the Grande Maison of Le Sentier has to offer. Both of them are beautiful. Both of them are beautifully musical. Both of them have an insane 15-day power reserve, and mechanically almost identical. The yellow gold watch pulls out ahead in terms of richness of case, richness of movement finish, but it also loses sheer impact to the open dial of the Master Grande Tradition minute repeater in titanium vanadium. And although it does have a theoretical chronometry advantages, it's a dead heat effectively, with the difference in actual precision and tuning of these watches being what they call within the noise when they test automobiles. Both of these are Galacticos, both of these are heavy hitters, and yes, both of these can help you get your reps without breaking a sweat. See them and own them on our website.